Okay, now we're at the Roluos compound, and we're at Preah, which is in the upper middle. This is it. Entering through the bare remains of the entrance building that most of them have. This one's pretty much destroyed, or I should say run down. Probably a lot of the stone that was here has been used for other purposes. But here you can see these turnings, a little bit less elaborate, although larger than the ones we've seen before. Something to look at is the joining of these large slabs. Very much straightforward, just like a cabinet maker might do. This Roluos group is named for the little town that's nearby, but the importance of it, of this whole three temple complex, if you will, and there's actually a few more minor ones, is that it was the first Angkorian Khmer Empire capital. And the one that we're at right now, as I said, is Preah. And here what we have are 6 towers that are displayed on this platform. And apparently we're going to see some fairly well preserved carvings. It was originally surrounded by walls, and we can detect some of that just as I pan around. Its name stands for Sacred Bull, and it's from the statues of bulls at the front of the center of the towers. Now this stone is interesting. It's laid out here as part of the stepping area, but I don't think it was. I think it was, we're looking at it from the wrong direction, so let me look at it correctly. Okay, what we're looking at here would have come probably off the temple itself, and it might have been over a doorway. You can see that not much has been done to try to restore this, which is understandable. It's not oft visited by tourists, although it is. Here are one of 2 small towers. Again, I marvel at the time and effort and skill that it took to make these turnings. They weren't made on a lathe, to my knowledge, although they might have been. I just don't think they had that technology. And here another structure that we would normally have entered through. In spite of the deterioration of these outlying buildings, the 6 main temple buildings still have their 3 pairs of entrance lion type of animals, and we can see 2 of the other 5 temples at the back there. I'm guessing this is a Brahma bull. And the 3rd one here, there's very little left of it. The lintel in this building in the upper portion of those side columns is nicely still preserved. I doubt with any real effort on the part of archaeologists or preservationists. Now notice it looks like it's a big long naga in an upside down U shape, but it looks like rather playful figures up at the top there. Well, that's a horse, so it's not the naga unless that's symbolically part of the naga now. Certainly a monster there with something issuing out of its mouth. And it is, whatever's issuing out contains those horses. The insides here, of which very little is left. Notice how that corbel type arching is used in this 4-sided context, if I'm using the right terminology. And then in here probably would have been a platform, which that may be parts of it, that held either sacred bulls or whatever the totem was. Here one of the side lintels, and here rather than a monster at the center, it's an elephant. And I don't know that these were ever doors that opened, but I can't be sure, because the other 3 sides are all the same and don't appear to have allowed any access. Here on the back one, instead of an elephant or a monster, is some kind of personage. And on this fourth side, this is a little side to the left of the front, a bird-like character, part human, part bird-like. And this bit of statuary is in all of the niches. And it appears to be a man holding some kind of long staff. Now that might have been the power staff that's referred to. On the middle temple at the back, this character, the man, stands out a little bit more in detail. And I'm not sure if this is a woman or a man. What's interesting are these doorways that look like they have inscriptions written all along the face, which is kind of novel. It's looking innocent as hell are beggars. Now notice these two columns. The one on the left, of course, is a reproduction. But notice the one on the right has a great deal of detail in it, which the one on the left doesn't have. So again, the makeshift is make it so it generally looks like it. Don't worry about any kind of true accuracy. Remembering that this is the first Angkorian Khmer temple complex and capital, this wall may simply be the beginnings of the concept, which as the empire grew more powerful, so the walls grew bigger, taller, thicker. And this is a relatively modest square footage of temple space too, again for the same reasons. It's interesting that there have been some attempts to restore at least portions of these temple buildings, which is good because it gives the viewer at least a hint as what it might have looked like when it was new. Now this is interesting, looking at this pedestal. First of all, it looks like a fairly complete one. But what's interesting is, what is this drainage arm on the right, the groove? If this were the Mayans or the Aztecs, I assume it was a blood ritual drainage trough, if you will. But here it may just mean that it collected water that dripped down from the temple top off to the side. Here we have the same thing, only lacking the upper support, but there's the feet of what might have been a statue of something that has to be remembered when we look at these sites, particularly the old ones, particularly the more remote ones, is that anyone with money and or power, that's redundant, would have easily over the centuries been able to come here, steal the stuff they wanted for their home or whatever. And so for that reason alone, much should be missing. Only that which they had no interest in isn't. It's sad, the condition of kids, but only parents who are ignorant totally still continue to breed when they can't feed. It's a sad commentary, but it's reality. And it is my opinion that when you give food to these hungry masses that keep exploding in population, all you do is throw gas on a fire. It's stupid. Okay, now we're about to enter Bakong. I'm on the right-hand side at that little gap, just about ready to go in. Now, actually, the gap is the moat, so I'm to the right of that. So I'm just going to give a synopsis here on Bakong, and then I'll do the real videoing. This was built by the third Angkorian king as his state temple, and it did two things. One, it set the Temple Mountain architectural formula on a grand scale, and it also began the use of stone rather than simply brick. This design and this concept lasted now another 400 years, and of course transformed over into those bigger later temples, of which Angkor Wat may be the epitome. I'll just pan slowly around. I'm obviously on the eastern side, but you'll see this was a beautiful, picturesque environment, and it still is. Okay, a couple things to notice. Notice the wall is not substantial. I mean, it's fairly thick for stone, but it's not a big wall like we've seen later on. This idea of the windows with the turned columns may have originated here, I don't know. Okay, now I'm in what would have been the building that is on the wall. You might call it the entrance building. If it were a fortress, this would be the guard building. Here to the left, a fairly well preserved five-headed cobra snake naga. Remember, that's the spiritual rainbow bridge to the gods. This is where that concept was instituted architecturally, at least. Now pan slowly around, and you can see how pretty it is, even now. Remember, the moat represented the universe, the oceans of the Indian mythological Meru environment or world. I don't know what that relatively modern building is. Maybe tourist facilities, I don't know. Here a new Wihan, at least, temple building. Beautiful vegetation here. It's too bad that this vegetation, etc., has not become the standard for the other monuments, which it would seem could naturally be similar, since the climate should be the same and the soil also. Presumably the area that I'm standing on, this level, as well as the next level, represent continents. But you can see that there's a wall here encompassing this more central area of this island, if you will. And as usual, I'm standing in a building, or would have been a building, that had several windows or doorways, passages as you came in. And at the center point where I am now, it would have branched off again with other entrances down there and behind me, and still a couple more doorways to pass through. Probably right where I'm standing was some kind of a monument, edifice. If it were Buddhism, it would be a Buddha. And maybe the different religions did exist here at different times. There are several sub-buildings, but it all seems to be symmetrical. This longer one here, a bigger temple like there. Here a little building, and the same thing duplicated on the other side. And of course, as you can see, again, another symmetrical duplication of buildings. A long one going the opposite axis here. A bigger building over there than the one to the left that we saw. And again, it's duplicated over here. Now looking back, beyond that, we can see a larger temple on the right, and there probably was one to the left. These probably represent other subsidiary mountains, smaller mountain peaks from Mount Meru, which should be what this one in front of us is. Also, I can see the remains of paving, so everything inside this area would have been paved, although it appears that there were a roadway or causeway access that was elevated a little bit. And now notice here the holes that we see are square in apparently all the contexts. So what's the difference in this earlier approach to hole making versus just the individual round holes before? Although remember, they looked like they were star-shaped or octagon-shaped holes. Before I go into the main temple, I'm just looking at these smaller buildings. And again, we can begin to look at some of the elements like the lion, those doorways that aren't doorways, but that center portion of the doorway plus the turned columns appear to be very similar to Preah monument that we just looked at, but much larger in size. And since this was built by the third of the four kings, we certainly should expect to see some kingly one-upmanship. And looking past this building remains to those others just to look at some features up on top. Interesting that on this sub-temple, just at the very top, there's just a small portion of some visible relief detail. Here, for whatever the reason, we can see the rock that was put as facing against the interior wall of rock that probably, with a lot of dirt and junk, forms the platform that next terrace is on, are just crumbled and lying across the pathway here. You wonder how that just happened. But here, a few artifacts left. And I wonder if that knob on that rock there, was it for the purpose of connecting it to another part of that building, or did it serve an aesthetic function in its own right? I don't know. Here, a little bit of detail remaining. I hope that this is just being stored here for future replacement, perhaps. This mound, as all mounds near excavations to me, near monuments to me, represents another building structure that might have been here. We can see the outline of stone, so it's probably the case. And that was probably an entrance area to it, causeway, if you will. And here we're looking at another long building. This is a rather large doorway. Doesn't look like this building would have been that high, but perhaps it was the same height as these other two buildings that we can see. Maybe there were many such buildings. What I'd call Chedai if I were in Thailand. I'm looking now at the main complex. Is that a bull? And the one up there also. Here we get a picture of the stone, or view of the stone that fills these three of the doorways on these buildings. And can see that that was never intended to be an open room. It was never just filled in. That's the way it was built. And it appears that these protuberances were supposed to be structural. We can see the bottom one is still embedded in that wall. I'm still outside the main complex, but this is a view of it from the left side if you were facing it from the front. Standing inside this monument, I'm surprised at the size of this hole, which gets smaller as it goes deeper. But why so deep? Why so big? Did it hold a particularly huge monument here that it felt necessary to stabilize? It's hard to imagine. Here you can see that the brick is covered with a thin layer of cement that probably then was either painted or frescoed. And here on the walls, that elegant, probably Khmer, Cambodian calligraphy. And on the same temple, some detail above the door, which is actually quite well preserved, at least as to the upper portion of the door. And then I'll narrow down on this facing because it still looks pretty good. Now if I shift the camera over a little bit, you'll see how everything that you see in the way of detail is just a veneer of cement. On this side, we can get a little better glimpse of the detail that was on these false wall doors, including these door handles or door knockers. This I have not been able to see before. And I don't think those are identical. Can't tell for sure if these are elephants, or I guess elephants. I'm now at the back of the main temple, and I can see that this sub-sized temple seemed to go all the way around, so there may be two at least on each side. Notice the style of the two carving niches on the right sides and left side of the doorway, the lintel area, and all of this seeming to spring from that even earlier temple that we looked at this morning. And the remains of this lintel above this door. And I may have been wrong earlier this morning about this nicely carved stone simply being something that was up on top. This is one that was part of the stairway. In fact, it's broken off, as you can see from the piece behind it. Again, from the other side, what are these animals? Elephants, bears, or the bull? Given that the bull was important in the first monument we looked at today, and that this appears to be a bull, I'm guessing that those animals are bulls. And here, looking another 90 degrees to the left, same thing. And here, three of them are arrayed. Just outside the inner temple wall is this cleaned up area here for probably gatherings or maybe markets. Very tranquil, very pretty. It's hard to keep your brain from automatically slipping into the idea that this is a fort complex or a palace as opposed to simply a religious site. Evidence of restoration, not proceeding very rapidly, although this is a Saturday. But at least it shows an intent to preserve the heritage that can make the money. I'm always surprised at the height of these stairs. They have to be 12, 14 inches or more in height, and they vary. For people that had a very short stature, here just a little remnant of detail left. Again, you can see that this whole wall would have been covered by this now dark black cement veneer, if you will, and then enameled, or in some instances had reliefs, or what would look like reliefs but weren't. Okay, I'm pretty sure this is an elephant, and those are the trappings that hold harnesses on in this instance, but the battle platform in other instances. And that remnant of a disc there would have held the bottom of the trunk. And notice the niches there, or notches, for holding a banister, I'm guessing. And it probably held nagas. It was probably once some kind of a statue, perhaps of a bull or an elephant. Notice I'm on the third level, a replica of the other. And there are several more above me. And it appears that these three elephants are successively smaller, starting with this one. And notice this next level, which is not the final one, has little temples all the way around it, or Chedai, for example. And it also appears that lions would have bracketed these stairways at every level. And these in turn would have held some kind of icon in there, Buddha or Linga or whatever. Now this building designed, this top part of this monument designed somewhat like those lower monuments that we were in. with three sides having this false door. From the looks of these holes, and notice that these do look like they're starred, not just round. I suspect that the only way they look round is when they've sat in the weather for considerable amount of time and somehow worn out, or been worn out by people's fingers like I'm doing, as opposed to the one back here that's not. And again, notice that there are real carvings here as opposed to on those walls where the reliefs would have been in the cement. A little bit of the detail that's still well preserved, but not much. Sandstone and Bangkok's acid rain weathers well. Here a little bit of good detail. That block might have been either a weaker piece of sandstone or replaced or whatever. Again, the deep hole, but for what purpose, I have no clue. Now these lion statues look much thinner than the others, unless they're just fracturing vertically for some reason. So as I pan around, try to imagine, if you will, all the buildings completed. Now, CG can do this for us in the future someday if it ever has the will, but for whatever the reason, a well-preserved lion. Perhaps another one down there. Here the little ripples are the result, I think, of a lot of water bugs on the surface, rather than fish under it. Okay, we're now north of the other temples we've been at Lolei. Lolei is my pronunciation. Okay, this is an island temple built in the middle of a now dry barre or reservoir, handmade. It consists of 4 towers that are made of brick on a ladder light, which is a much stronger type of stone, but still not terribly powerful. It's that gray colored stone that we've seen before. And this was the last temple compound built at this capital before the capital was moved back to Angkor Wat permanently. Well, until they moved it to Phnom Penh. As you can see, it's pretty compact. There are these 2 side temples, and there are probably a couple on the other side that once were there, and there may be one in the back I can't see yet. And then this larger one here. But you wonder if the king at this time didn't have a hint that either he didn't have much power, and that those who did would not be here long. In other words, the capital would be moved. I don't know. Some nice remaining detail here. Again, the same idea that we've seen in the other temples. Okay, there's another temple at the back here. Maybe the highest one, actually. And there's a lion to the right, another lion, and it looks like either a ceremonial bowl or maybe the top of one of these towers. You know, some prior restoration efforts have tried to band this upper front part in to hold it from collapsing. Hopefully it worked, but you can see that it's collapsing in the center. They filled it in, but it's being supported by this new cement wall, and it looks like they're doing other efforts to support it. Again, another view. So far it looks like there are just these 4 towers. Don't know where the other is. You see how easily the cement or stucco veneer has fallen away. I don't know whether these rocks supported a wall, or it looks like they might have from the grooves that would have held other. Here you can see the preservation difficulty there. Created a wooden structure to hold that large rock structure in place on the brick as the brick erodes around it. Same here. Now on this platform, which would have been the temple originally, you can see that people have built houses over time, and apparently the government's allowed them to stay here, obviously. But here you also get a sense of another level, terrace level down there, and then the lower level. And this complex sat on, as I said earlier, the first large religious barrage or reservoir that was hand dug to create that religious and economic aspect of water and ocean, universe, etc. Here a Japanese tour group handing out candy to the kids. It's exactly the wrong goddamn thing to do. Turn the goddamn kids into beggars. Here you get a sense of that barrage, how far it goes. In other words, where the far wall of the reservoir is, I don't know. But just imagine when it was all filled up with water and you came in here on some kind of causeway.